Welcome, guys, to another episode of WCG Close-Up. This is episode 14, which actually I love number 14 because that is the day that I was born on, September 14th. So this is actually my number episode. Hope it's a good one, Wolf. I'm here with Wolf, of course, as always, and we are going to be talking about, because it's the most wonderful time of the year, as you can see, which means we talk about roster swaps and the next season of League of Legends that we do have coming. So how are you doing, Wolf, first of all?
I'm good. I'm very excited to talk about these new rosters finally. We're getting to the very end of what Koreans like to call the Stove League here, which is where everything is on fire. And rosters do get finalized. It's a baseball term, but it's moved into League of Legends. And finally, we've pretty much got all of our LCK teams decided. Mm-hmm. There may be like one or two minor adjustments over the next few weeks. But for the most part, we know what the LCK is going to look like for next year, and it looks really exciting. Like, we have some of the coolest, best rosters I think we've had in the last 3 years.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because LCK, when we saw them at Worlds, they looked incredibly strong as a region, right? All the teams that went, including Hanwha Life, who not a lot of people had too much faith in, outside of one special person, Atlas, our co-caster, at least for the casters. Everybody did really well from the rosters that went. The only issue is that we didn't win Worlds, right? EDG was able to take that title away from the LCK. So everything has changed up. Pretty much every single roster, I think, outside of T1, which looks pretty similar. Every other roster has changed to a really big effect.
I guess Fredit BRION, to a certain extent, is like, for the most part, the same, with the addition of the top side there. But we'll get into the more nitty gritty of it. But yeah, it feels like every single roster on paper, minus Hanwha Life, got better. Hanwha Life really lost, and we will talk a little bit deeper about them when we get. But for the most part, every team you expected a small upgrade at best, and I feel like at worst case scenario, besides again Hanwha Life, every team got that. We will get to Hanwha at some point, and we will all be very sad when we talk about it. But yeah, we're not going to start there.
Yeah, we're not going to start there, and it's a good point that you do make, Wolf, because we are later on. We're going to go over to a board where we kind of rank all the teams based on our expectations for those teams, how interesting the roster swap does feel. So that'll be a little bit later on. For now, we're going to tackle all the rosters one by one in the LCK. And then we're also going to mention a bunch of the interesting changes from around the world. There's a lot of super teams, I think at least one in each region. So definitely a lot to talk about, Wolf. So why don't we just go ahead and get started? We have all these sheets here. Might as well go through them, starting off alphabetically, of course, with...
No bias. All alphabetical, no bias.
We're not biased for the Afreeca Freecs. They just start with A. And we are going to be starting with the Afreeca Freecs. So what are your thoughts initially on this one, Wolf?
I really like the roster. I think most people are putting their eyes on Teddy because he's the most high-profile player that joined the roster. And he was a player that was often overshadowed by Gumayusi a lot of this year. Although there were times this year where he actually was the one playing completely and did help carry them through the playoffs. But at the same time, even though there's so much focus on Teddy, for me, the big pickup is Fate. Like, I'm very excited to see how Fate did. He did extremely well, he did extremely well on SANDBOX last year. Mm-hmm. And I think his potential on a solid roster like this can be fully realized because I do think this roster on paper is stronger than SANDBOX's last year. Or this year, because it's still technically 2021, but last season. Mm-hmm. Sorry if I slip up on that.
We're going to be doing that a lot, like at least 5 times this episode.
So I like seeing Fate on a strong roster like this. You've got Keen to back him up, and the other thing that we are not really talking about is the departure of Fly, which is one of the players that I think a lot of fans were most frustrated with. Although I think at the end of the season, he was okay, which was better than we could say for most of 2021. This is a huge upgrade for Afreeca Freecs, though, in grabbing Fate.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you there, Wolf. The mid upgrade is gigantic. I think that Fly, at best, he looked like he could play off meta champions relatively well and not get behind. At worst, he was part of the reason why they were losing some of those games and were very inconsistent, you can say, because as a player, he was. I think Fate offers you a lot of consistency in that role. In terms of the other lineups or the other players, Another one to mention is Hoyt in the support role, right? Lahen's had a pretty big name on him, but alongside of the Afreeca Freecs roster, not really able to put it together and at least make Worlds. Like, he's still a very good player, but I'm curious to see how Hoyt is going to do, especially after he was behind Barrel for so long on the side of DAMWON Kia, but now he's going to be the main starting support on this team.
I'm really curious to see how that goes as well, because he not only has big shoes to fill, but is also playing with an incredibly high-profile AD carry, so there's a lot of pressure there. I know LM is a big question mark for a lot of people in terms of the jungle.
Yeah.
But I would worry more if you're an Afreeca Freecs fan about how that bot duo is going to work together at the beginning. I think eventually once they find their footwork and once they start to build some of that synergy.
Their
fleet footwork.
First it's going to be slow and then it'll be fleet maybe.
Hey, Caitlyn's pretty popular these days. You never know. But yeah, once they start to sort it out, I think this roster is really promising. Like, I think right now, like, if I had to predict like where they would land when the regular season ends, like, I can't imagine this team is not in top 5. Like, I can't imagine this team is not on the winning side of the bracket going to playoffs.
I would agree. I think that for a long time, Hanwha Life was kind of the gatekeeper, and then Afreeca was a long time Afreeca was the gatekeeper, and then Hanwha Life was the gatekeeper. And now I think Afreeca are they're trying to break out of that kind of 5th or 6th place team. Now they kind of want to make a slight dash towards the top side. As you mentioned at the beginning of the show, Wolf, feels like every team is kind of slightly upgraded. And this definitely feels like, in terms of out of the teams that got slightly upgraded, this feels like one of the better upgrades for me. I think that Keen, Fate, and Teddy, just looking at those 3 names, it's actually huge, right? Not a lot of people were talking about Fate, but I don't feel like he was really given all the tools to work the best on the lineup before. So now here on Afreeca Freecs, as long as LM and Hoyt are not totally, disastrous, I think this is going to be a strong team.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that Keen is used to kind of being the star of the show, right? He's the player that, Afreeca has always looked towards and has kept for so many years as a result of his superb, solo play. And his ability to control a lane has given Afreeca the opportunity to sometimes win games they shouldn't have, or play from a nice lead that they wouldn't have had if it was a different top laner. But he's also now going to have to deal with LM, who's a very much more passive player than Dread was.
Yeah.
And he's also going to have to deal with, Teddy, who's very experienced. And I don't want to call him like a diva, but he's not the only star on the team anymore. Like, Keen is not the only guy, right? He's got a lot of new rising stars with him, Fate as well. So I think his attitude will have to change, but if he plays as well as he did last year, or this past seasons of this year, then this roster could go places.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, especially as a top laner, if you're the guy that gets all the attention, you're just living the dream, because you get ganks all the time, you get dives on the top side, you get drafted for, and now he's not always going to be drafted for. He's going to have a lot less jungle. He might still have LMs still up there on the top side if the other lanes just can survive by themselves. But, it depends on what the team wants to do and how they are going to work around that. So I feel like we've gone over a lot of the Afreeca Freecs. Why don't we move on to BRION Esports, the next team here. Wolf, your initial feelings about this roster?
On one hand, I like it when a new team that's a new roster together, especially this is a new team in our franchise league. Like, it's the team with the least history overall. I like it when a team is not afraid to say, like, let's give it one more shot. Like, let's try to stick with this roster for one more year. It's easy to do that cost-wise if you're not going to, like, really spend money and actually upgrade your team. On one hand, like, that's a justification in itself. But I think a lot of the players on this team are still growing and developing, and then some of the players like Lava, for example, and Umpty were like pretty high profile in their own right. So I do appreciate that Fredit BRION is going to give it another go. That being said, giving it another go when everyone else is actually slapping down Omanons on the table and the checkbooks are coming out and everybody's spending money means that you might end up being down in the Hanwha zone. And again, Hanwha's H in our team list, so we will get there eventually. But right now, this team, it looks pretty budget. And we got Sword back, which is weird, and to me still my most surprising signing of the whole year.
Yeah.
Like, but then they also got Morgan after that. They were like, but also Morgan. I'm like, okay, like, you guys are really just trying to like play with people's hearts a little bit.
Confuse everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how to feel about that. Like, we don't know how Sword is going to be. We got a lot of tastes about how Morgan is. I do think that he's decent. I don't think he's as bad as everybody else said. I think he got this kind of nickname as like the worst player at Worlds. And Worlds is filled with world-class players for a reason, like the tippy top of each region that goes there. Morgan in his own right is a pretty strong player. Now, was he the worst player at Worlds? I think he was definitely in the bottom half. But at the same time, this is the LCK. It did have 4 teams that went to Worlds and a lot of competition, right? So in terms of, as you mentioned, it being a little bit budget, right? We do have the same 4 players on the bottom side. And then if you were like, okay, but let's add this, like, let's bring Kana in, you know, like, let's say they got Kana, I'd be like, that's really interesting. You know, someone who could really mix things up. He can definitely make a lot of solo plays by himself. Sword and Morgan are, they're decent players, but they're not players that are going to be able to do that. And so it just feels like we haven't really done anything with BRION Esports except bring in a couple of Hoya clones. And I don't really know. Again, we need to see how Sword is. We need to see how Morgan develops and how these young players do develop. But I don't know. I'm not too kind of uninspired by this.
I'm very uninspired as well. And now that Morgan's on the roster, like, I don't even know if Sword will really see that much play. It's really just quite puzzling that they picked him up in the first place, because real talk for a second, if we can, like, you know, get deep, like, he's not Korea's favorite player. You know, he's not the West's favorite player. There's not even really a marketing move you could go to and be like, well, I mean, he was part of Griffin. Like, everybody really liked him, right? Like, we got to bring it back an old name. It's not quite. It's actually quite the opposite of that. So it feels really puzzling. In the past, teams like Fredit BRION and Generic Green Wings, like if we go further back, were kind of your buffer test. They were your relegation teams. Like, who can get in? Like, can you beat this team? In a best of 5, and then maybe be part of the LCK. We don't have that anymore. So now it's like, okay, are you better than Fredit BRION? Like, I feel like Fredit BRION took a lot of wins this year where they beat a team that's way better than them on most days, but on that particular day, something was off, or on that particular day, the draft was weird, or on that particular day, they tried something new, and you got by Fredit. Like, that's kind of how I feel like this team is going to be this year, too, where, like, the wins you see, like, might feel inspiring in that moment, but it's really just like, yeah, that was a weird draft. Fredit, you know, they're still an LCK team. Like, they still are top Korean players. But I really think my, like, verdict on this team is bottom 2 for sure. Like, easily.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that them and Hanwha are just going to be stuck down there. And that's a bit unfortunate. But again, the LCK does have a lot of competition, not just in how good the players are, but I'm sure, you know, because we didn't really get to see this side, but in terms of the offseason and the roster swaps and how much money, you know, maybe the higher ups are like, no, we're not, you know, no. And then, like, what are you going to do, right?
Yeah.
So you're kind of stuck. So we'll just have to wait and see how those players on BRION do develop, as we will move on to a very well-known team.
Exciting one.
DAMWON Kia, the next on the list. I think that DRX is ahead of them alphabetically, but...
Not if you spell out DAMWON, D-A.
Yeah, if it's DK instead of DRX. Okay, I see what happened there. So, we have DAMWON Kia, we have Burtle, Canyon, Showmaker, Duck Dom, and Kellen. So, I already know what you're going to say, Wolf. What do you think?
Well, the rosters that we have in front of us also haven't taken into account that Hoya was also recently signed to the team, so that was announced a few days ago, which you guys will know about by the time you watch this video. I'm a very big Duck Dom Kellen guy, as you know. Like, I think Duck Dom was probably the best AD carry in Korea all year long. Overall, like, yeah, he did slump a little bit in certain metas, but I think he's the most consistent and best AD carry that we had in Korea. Fantastic. Showmaker, one of the most consistent mids, if not the most consistent mid in the world. And then Canyon, you know, 2020 MVP, etc. Burtle is where I raise a few eyebrows, and I can talk about this now because it's already come out and it's, like, you know, somewhat public, and all these leaks have happened. There's been a lot of leaks in Korea, like journalists posting rumors, but DAMWON Kia were trying to get the Shy. Was a big rumor that was happening. Like the Shy is going to play top for DAMWON Kia. Everybody's talking about it. DAMWON really wants him. It didn't work out. DAMWON's trying to get Kana. It doesn't work out, right? There's a lot of drama regarding that across 3 teams, but we're not going to get into that. So they wanted to get. They had 2 players that were clearly, based on what we know from journalists leaking and the drama that ensued, that makes it seem very likely this didn't in fact occur. That Birdall was definitely not DAMWON Kia's first choice. Gen.G ended up getting, spoilers, Dorn for their top lane, so Birdall was available, so they were able to make a deal. Birdall came through. I think a lot of people are really excited about Birdall because like a few casters like really hyped him up a few times, and there were some tweets and like some solo queue stories and like some Reddit posts and like some, oh, look at him get the triple kill like in that one game that one time kind of thing. Even though he played, I think, less than 5 games total in LCK, and we don't really know how good of a player he is. He sticks out like a sore thumb. You look at these players, Canyon, Showmaker, Duckdom, Kellen, and you look at head coach Koma, and then you see Birdall. It's like, well, this player needs some time to develop, and I do think that Hoya will actually see more play than he does in the early part of spring season while he comes into his own, because even though Hoya is not as successful as Birdall was when he was playing and the team he was on, I think that Hoya's experience will really shine through, and they will need to rely on him a lot in the early part of the season. If Birdall develops to the player that we know he can be, like DAMWON Kia looks like locked top 3 to me. Like that's my take.
I mean, if he develops into the player that a lot of people have been hyping him up to, they're number 1. Like for me, I'm like, sign me the paper right now. Like I'll put that in right now. But yeah, it's definitely something to look at. The one thing I would say is that DAMWON, they have gotten so far with a shaky bottom lane, at least even towards the end of this year of 2021. Again, they kind of turned it on and they got a little bit better, Ghost and Barrel. But they weren't exactly the stars of the show. Barrel wasn't having his gigantic Alistair plays anymore, like occasionally. But, at the same time, they were kind of like pushing it through and nearly won the world championship with that bottom lane. Plus, like a very strong top laner, but also someone who was kind of underperforming by the end of it in Khan, right? So even just having Canyon and Showmaker, and then you add Duckdom, it's like, okay, good enough. As long as Birdall's not feeding like 0-6 on Aurelia again, we're good. So for me, I'm like, it's hard not to get excited about this. I think that the 1-2 duo now of having Hoya up there for some more experience is really going to benefit them to allow Birdall to develop into a much better player. He needs to get much more consistent. I think if he's feeding all the time, yes, his team will be able to win a bunch of win a bunch of games without him essentially, but they still need him to kind of like be at least a little bit like Khan, where he's stable.
I think in the same way that T1 had Faker and Closer last year, where Faker played a lot more passive style, but is the veteran and is often doing shot calling, etc. And Closer was like the mechanical god. It seemed like he didn't play as much as Faker, obviously, but when he did come out on Aurelia, I feel like I really draw like a parallel in my mind to Closer and Birdall in terms of their playstyle and where they sit. And Hoya is a very strong weak side player, like Khan often was. Didn't have to be, but he often ended up playing that way, so the resources could be put elsewhere. And I think that if you want to play a lot of strong side champions, it's a meta where you like that style, yeah, maybe we'll see some more Birdall in play. You want to play a little bit slower, maybe Hoya is your guy. So I do think that regardless of who's going to be the top laner, like, perma at the end, whoever wins out for the roster, there's a lot of flexibility between these two players because their styles are so different.
Yeah, and the rest of the team is just goddamn insane.
Yeah,
it's
just true.
It's just one of the best rosters we've seen. I mean, it's insane, especially if Duckdom is as consistent as he was this year in 2021 for the next year. So, I mean, this is kind of DAMWON Kia. I think a lot of people can get really excited about this roster. And maybe even be less critical than us about Birdall because everybody's still very excited about Birdall. So very interested to see just how strong they are and if DAMWON Kia can continue their dynasty, you could say, in a way. So up next, we do have DRX. Definitely last year, a team that brought a lot of, unfortunate feelings, I suppose you could say. But seems like they have improved a bit. Wolf, what do you think?
I'm kind of like, I look at this roster and I have to like, every time someone asks me about DRX, I have to like pull it up on my phone. I'm like, wait, who's on that team again?
Yeah.
Because it is the weirdest roster of players that like the LCK has ever seen. It's like a patchwork quilt of players. Okay, like, let me just read it out for everybody. So Kingen and Pyosik are unchanged, right? That's your top side of the map. Then you have Zika, who's coming in. Jet has retired. Deft is coming in as the new main AD carry, and then you have Beryl. And then CV Max is out, and Coach Kim is in. So two famous coaches, depending on which side of the war you were on, in their own rights. And I think very similar styles of coaching based on what we've seen from Coach Kim in the past, especially on his time in SK Telecom. This roster it feels kind of dated. It feels like the Island of Misfit Toys, the patchwork quilt, right? But there's a lot of power in this roster. Like Kingen at his best and Pyosik at his best. Really solid top lane. They have synergy. They've worked together before. Pyosik, I think, was like the captain who was going down with the ship a little bit last year.
Yeah.
And then Deft coming in. We know Deft and Pyosik are really close. Every time I see them at the studio together, they're always talking together. Deft with somebody's like not eat with his team, but actually eat with Pyosik. Yeah. That's how close they are. So I think that is part of why Deft is here. How well are Deft and Beryl going to work together with Zico's returning to Korea? There's just so many question marks for this team, and that's how DRX always is.
Yep, DRX is always a question mark. It's always a eyebrow raiser, and that's actually exactly what I did just before. I was like, yeah, Deft and Beryl, it's a really weird bot lane. I feel like if Beryl can bring some of that aggressiveness alongside of Deft, who we know can be aggressive in lane and very dominant, that, on paper it's like a question mark, but if we see it and they actually work well together, it's like, oh man, this is like a really good bot lane. It does feel weird though. Like I just never thought I would see these two players together. Maybe it's just because I always assumed Ghost and Beryl would be on DAMWON, and that was kind of the team that got the most press and the most eyes on it. So yeah, Deft back to DRX with Beryl. I feel like it could be terrible or it could be amazing, and that is not a very good analytical point to make, but I feel like that's really my main feeling here.
Yeah.
I think that Zika's also a bit of a question mark now coming back. I don't know, Wolf.
I'm not really sure either. I think my biggest question mark for this team is going to be the bottom duo and how they work together, because I don't think you could find two different supports. Like if you could pick two supports in the LCK and be like, which ones are the least like each other? I think it would be Vista and Beryl. So I don't know how it's going to be for Deft to adjust to play with Beryl, and how Beryl will have to adjust then for this roster, because he's not playing with Canyon anymore nonstop. Like he's not going to be making those top roams as easily anymore with this roster. It's going to be like, for the first time since Beryl took off and won championships, like he actually has to play hard mode. Like it can't just be like DAMWON's fine, the bot lane, we don't know, we'll see what happens there. Like it's not looking so hot, but it's okay because the team's good enough. Like this isn't going to be it. If you're a liability in this roster, like you might not make it to summer on this roster. You might get kicked because this roster demands a lot of respect in it, and it has Coach Kim. Like Coach Kim and Koma, two coaches that Beryl has dealt with very recently. I don't think Koma really, I don't want to say broke Beryl and got him back to like, top form, but he was able to like recover slowly over time from MSI. Coach Kim, very similar coaching style. Maybe he ends up putting Beryl on the right track, but I think the end result is like this team could be anywhere between 3 and 8. Like it could be anywhere between 3 and 8. That's like my final answer.
Oh, I feel exactly the same way. Oh, man.
It's not going to be 9 or 10, and it's not going to be 1 or 2.
I hope
it
it's
could be 3 to 8.
I really hope it's 3 because I'm a really big fan of Kingen. I think that guy deserves his time to shine. Like he's had some really big games where he's carried and stuff, and I just think that the overall just sad feeling I think of DRX this entire year has kind of gotten him down. I think the same thing happened to Pyosik. And it's interesting you mentioned the jungle support duo as well, because Pyosik is very much a herbivore jungler, right? Where he's just in the jungle, farming, playing Udyr, playing Olaf. I'm going to get 100 minions by 15 minutes or whatever for a jungler. And he can't really do that if he's going to work with Beryl. So you talked about Beryl and Vista being very different. I think that Beryl and Pyosik are also very different. So they're going to have to work that out. It's a lot of clashing styles, and that's kind of why that patchwork quilt analogy works perfectly. But moving on from DRX, we will go over to Gen.G. Very exciting roster, Wolf.
It is the most super of super teams. And I'll read it out for you guys if you don't know. We might have a graphic on screen. Now the graphics team has to repair something.
No, I'm just... continue.
Anyway, Doran, Peanut, Chovy, Ruler, Lehens. Head coach, Score. Okay, so... I think this is the team that most people are most excited for, like, in the world. I think of all rosters, including LPL and even like Vitality's roster and the LEC we'll talk about later, I think if you look at every roster that's been built, no roster has like more star power and more notoriety packed into one 5-man team than Gen.G's roster has. And I don't know if that's going to be a good thing. Like, can you imagine a world where... Let's talk about these players individually for a second, where they've come from, right? Doran, he carried KT so hard, as best as he could, all year long. That molds you into the type of player that thinks everything is about me, no matter what, right? Peanut, MVP, carried Nongshim through some hard times in spring. In summer, they got gory. It was a lot easier, but he also became MVP. It's kind of like everything is about me. Now, Chovy, everything is about me.
Quite literally, everything is about Chovy.
And then,
regardless if you're talking about a different player, it's about Chovy.
And then, like,
continue.
Ruler is like, okay, well, not everything was always about Ruler, but yes, it was actually in most metas. He played the scaling, late game AD carry, and everything was about how much farm he was going to get. Every resource is always given to Ruler. Ruler is one of the highest gold post 15 minutes given to an AD carry out of like any team in the LCK. They give him all the farm. He farms up. How can you have these 4 players together who all demand insane resources, their entire background, their entire careers over the especially last year? They all are like sucking all the resources off of Summoner's Rift. How can they all share? How can they all get along?
But wait.
Yeah, then there's Lehens. Now, Lehens is like a little bit outside of this box.
But he's been in the box at times as well. Coming from Griffin, and then he was on Hanwha Life, and really big struggle streak there, and then moved over to Afreeca, and I feel like everybody was expecting a lot out of him, but he never quite touched it. He was like here, and he needed to be here, and he was good, but he wasn't great after those times, I think, and maybe this is for him. He's like, this is the year I'm going to pop off. I'm going to do everything. I'm going to be the guy, right? But this is not the team to do that. Like, this is not the team, because everything's going to be about Ruler in that lane, right? Is he ready to be like the Braum, Tom Kench, from days of past? Maybe not Tom Kench anymore, but is he ready to play Braum like half of the games for their team? I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, you remember when I said earlier about like you couldn't pick 2 different supports when I was talking about Vista, like to be like more different. I feel like if we're talking about Leo or Bang, like, could you pick 2 more like different AD carries than like Ruler versus Leo? Like, it's like just think about that for a second. Like, oh yeah, I was just like with Leo, we were kind of chilling, and like our team wasn't about the bottom lane, and now it's like Ruler's like, you will do everything I say when I say it, and you will go where I go, and you will not roam, you will not leave me behind, I will not farm under turret, that will not happen. So I think this team will be a top 3 team just because of its mechanical power alone. Like, these 5 players are so good that like even if they don't play to their full potential because of all the issues we've talked about and the egos that come with a super team like this, I think they will be a top 3 team. Will they reach greatness? Like, will they actually win an LCK season or end up winning like MSI, for example? I don't want to go too far ahead of ourselves. I don't see it right now, especially because the person who's in charge of all of this, the person who's the leader of this, the person who has to fix this is someone who has never coached before and how has been spending the last 2 years of his life in military. So yes, obviously he's stayed up to date on the meta. He's been streaming. He's been playing a ton. And he is a very respected player.
And now he's a man that's gone to the military, Wolf. Don't forget about that. He's going to lead this squad.
True. I just don't know if Score is like, it's like you have this ship that you're sailing, and you have all these players, and they're out on the boat, like they're hardened pirates with like a million tattoos and stuff, and Score's like showing up, like it was like first he like put his hat on for the first time. He's like, "Yo guys, it's my first voyage."
I mean, I think that's true, but also false because I mean, it is Score who has been playing since 2012.
Sure.
So I'm sure maybe part of the reason why he was selected is because Gen.G knew that if there was one person that all of these superstars would have respect in and trust and listen to, it would be Score, because he's basically their huge Sunbae being like, you know, someone you're superior basically if you're like a peer, right? So I feel like it's genius, but also at the same time not, because he's totally unproven. Like you were saying, like, does he even know how to coach? Yeah, he was a great player, but that doesn't mean you're a good coach. So that there's totally two different things. But at the same time, I feel like all these players will absolutely respect him. At least I would expect that. I hope that Ruler and Chovy are like, you know, at least they could like show him some respect, because those are the two players I'm a little bit concerned
doesn't look
about.
like it, but he is basically a wise sage. Like, you know, that's old man Score is like a meme that is older than he is, almost, it feels like. But we'll see how he does. He did do an interview recently with Inven, I think, where he talked about how positive he is about how things are looking and how the team is shaping up. So that gave me a little bit more hope. But I think my like final verdict on this team is like top 3 or bust. But like, I don't think, like, a lot of people look at this team like, how could they lose? There's no chance this team doesn't win everything. I'm like, I think there's a very high chance that this team, in fact, does not win anything all year, even though they're a top 3 team. Yeah,
I mean, it might just be the Gen.G curse, right? I think they've been in that kind of curse land for a while, where their team is really good. There's a lot of expectations on them, and then they just kind of disappoint after disappointment. I really hope sincerely, Gen.G, if you are watching this, that does not happen. But on paper, I could see that definitely could be a thing. Like, part of me, when I first saw this roster, it almost felt like some kind of like reality TV show lineup, where it's like you got this famous guy from, you know, from New York, and then you got the guy who's like a Southern guy from Texas, and they're gonna clash, and it's gonna be like this. But you know, if they work together, if Score is able to shape everybody up and actually go from first mate to like admiral of the ship, by all means.
I just imagine almost like it's like a Cartoon Network show, and like Chovy's like, Score! Peanut took my farm again.
It's definitely gonna happen too. Like, it's definitely gonna happen. Hopefully they can work together to make it to the final episode and all be friends again. So we went from happy times to sad times as we're moving on to Hanwha Life Esports here. Due to Willer on Fleek in the jungle, we got Karis, and then Samdi, or Samdi in Korean, and Vista. Kesman's still there. Although I think that one of the other coaches is not with the organization now, but Kesman's still the head coach. So Wolf,
so there was
what do you think?
There's a lot of stuff that I know that people have heard about the Hanwha Life Esports roster. And I can tell you guys, based on the rumors that I've heard, that, you know, you guys have seen all the tweets. What's the guy's name? Is like something Flash on cooldown or something like that. Then Kenzie's tweets and all the journalists out here in Korea. I don't know why I can't remember that guy's username right now, but it has something Flash in it. But he's like been one of the most reliable leakers. And we know that, like I was saying before about DAMWON Kia and their top laner, that Hanwha Life Esports, this was not the roster this was not the plan. They were not like, okay, I'll tell you what we're going to get on Fleek. It's going to be good. Yeah. So,
let me tell you about Samdi. Like, he's coming in.
There were a lot of rumors at the very end that Ilima, the Afreeca Freecs top laner, was going to be coming to the roster, but they couldn't come to an agreement. Obviously, Chovy was very close to staying, but I think part of the reason why he didn't was because they couldn't secure any solid top, or rather bottom duo players. They lost depth. Sam D, who I swear I've looked him up 4 times, and I'm still not really sure why he's here, but
it's not
like, honestly, the most hype thing, the most hype thing about this team is that Karis is on the roster, because Karis was the player who was below BDD for Gen.G, and who was like between Gen.G's academy and regular roster last year.
Yeah.
He's a very good player. We know he has a lot of potential. he did not like atrophy like many sub players did last year on Gen.G. They gave him an opportunity to excel in challengers. So he actually is still like fit, if you know what I mean. Like he's actually played a lot of official pro games this past year. So I'm looking forward to seeing how he's going to do. Vista and Willer have previous experience working together. Dudu obviously has worked with this team quite a bit and just ended up getting passed by Morgan at the end of the day. I expect that because Hanwha Esports is a team that they're one of the wealthiest orgs in the LCK, they have a ton of money, and I know this is not the roster that they want to build.
And a lot of fans too.
Yeah,
which is.
My theory is this is not the roster you're going to see for summer, and there will be some trades, and they will try to acquire some more players. I think right now they're like, we lost our window to get Chovy back. We lost a lot of opportunities to get big top players. Let's see where the dust settles when spring is over, and then maybe make some trades, make some moves. I think that's what they should do, considering that they probably have a lot of money left over after building what is probably going to be second worst team in the LCK. I don't even want to talk about it any more than that. I'm like, it's just really sad. Like, it's not supposed to happen. Like, this is a team that went to Worlds. Okay, this is Chovy's team, and it's gone. It was Chovy's team once anyways.
Yeah, well, I think on that note, I don't really have too much else to say. I was really looking forward to seeing where a lot of those challenger players would end up, and unfortunately, this was one of the high-profile players, at least in the mid lane, and I think that for him, unfortunately, he might be one of those players that is always below BDD, and then when he gets his chance, it's like, well, of course I didn't look great because I was on this team, right? So I don't know if he's going to have a lot of support with this lineup. Maybe On Fleet comes back in a big way. Maybe Dudu excels to the next level. I think Vista is a fantastic player, but he was also next to Def the entire year, and Chovy, and what Hanwha Life had before. So
I hope Sam D is like the new Prince, where like we can at least go that far with him. Where
I hope so.
Oh, this guy was like he wasn't top 380 carry in Korea, but he really had some games that were good, and we like him. I hope that's what we say about him in 6 months' time.
Yeah, just got to wait and see with Hanwha Life. But that's all we're going to say about Hanwha. Moving on now to KT Rolster. Definitely one of the more interesting rosters, I would say. I'm not really sure what to expect from this, really. But we got Rascal, Cuz, Aria, Aiming, and Life coming together.
There were a lot of rumors floating around about what roster KT was going to build, and you know how I always want KT to spend money because I think the telecom wars were always a big exciting part of the LCK and Pro League before it. And so we haven't really in the last, honestly, since Score won a title and retired and went to the military, we haven't really had a competitive telecom war between KT and SK Telecom T1, or now just T1. And this roster gives me hope we might have something interesting happening again. Aiming was rumored for a really long time. KT has clearly been in talks with him, I think, before even Worlds happened, because the rumors of that were like so old. And then KT announced the silhouette, so it was very obvious that he was going to be joining the roster. What I knew about this roster that was coming together for a long time, but couldn't tell anyone about until now, was that Aria has been in talks with this team for several months, and it was between him and the other player that was rumored to join the roster, Scout. And eventually, KT Rolster couldn't get Scout. He's staying with EDG, it seems. I don't think that's officially been announced, but that's the assumption. They have tweeted pictures of him with the roster, so that's the assumption. Maybe by the time
drama there too.
Yeah. By the time this video comes out, it might be announced officially, but I think at this exact moment while it's being recorded, it's 99% sure Scout is staying with EDG, but I know he was really being heavily considered for this roster. They still picked up Rascal and Cuz, and they also got Life. So KT spent money. They built a roster that it's not quite the same type of patchwork quilt as DRX, but it is quite odd, and there isn't a lot of synergy between these players, except Rascal and Life, I suppose. But it's a roster that you can kind of believe in. It's a roster you want to root for. You're like, I like all 5 of these players. They all have a cool, interesting history, and it seems like a bunch of bros who could maybe make top 4. You know what I'm saying? That's the kind of vibe I have with this team.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of leaning towards the more, patchwork thing, where I think this is another team where maybe we see in spring, some issues arising and the players not really working too well together, what to expect from Aria coming back to the LCK, all of this stuff. He looked great when we did see him over in the LJL, right, with
DFM, yeah.
DFM.
And he obviously played well at MSI and at Worlds, too, internationally.
So you know, while it might not be a scout, it's still a very exciting player, and it's someone that we can all look forward to. Seems like a very nice dude. You know, how are Arya and Guz going to work together? I have no idea. Like, I just have no idea what to expect out of that duo. How are Rascal and Cuz going to work together? I don't know. There are a lot of people that are big fans of Cuz and his play style. I think for me, it's a little bit too passive. In my, like, I feel like we're getting near like Pioshik levels of passivity.
Sure.
But he is a fantastic player. Like, we know he can do very well. I feel like this might be one of the rosters for him where it turns into a little bit of a challenge because it's not quite, you know, what T1 was in the past and what other rosters were. I think he used to play on Kingzone.
Yes,
I believe
Kingzone. Yeah,
with Khan.
Yes, and the Kingzone Dragon X with Khan in like 2018. I want to say.
Like, he's always had like some really, you know, top level teams. So how is he going to work with a team that might just be middling or at best, like, you know, fourth, we could say? It'll be interesting to see his development as a player, as a veteran as well. That's one of the things where, for me, it's like a question mark, but not really in the same way as other question marks, where it's like, you know, we have no idea. It's just like, how is Cuz going to do this year? I'm very curious.
If I could swap Cuz with Khalid in this roster, I feel like the whole thing changes, and I'm like really excited. I'm like, well, we got 3 Gen.G players on this roster. Like, they can meld Aiming and Arya on their return to Korea. And this roster has like so much great leadership. We still have Hirai, who, you know, from you and I, who are also StarCraft 2 commentators for a long time, have followed and watched that guy's coaching. He's got a good track record. Has he been like, you know, inspiring as of late? No, like that Scores Championship is like the last big title he's won. Their performance at Worlds was not good. But has he really had good tools for success? Not so much so far. So this KT Rolster team, I'm like cautiously optimistic about and a little bit excited about. And it feels like it's going to be a project I'm going to watch like either succeed or fail. Like, it's like I bought my KT crypto and I'm just going to like wake up every morning, but how's that doing?
Yeah.
Is it up today?
Has it crashed in the last week? I don't know. Let's see. Yeah. But yeah, positively or cautiously optimistic, I think is a good way to put it. Because, I mean, all of these guys are generally good. You know, all of them have pretty good track records. Are they the best in their roles? I wouldn't say really for any of them. Like, I think Rascal got close in 2021. But not quite. You know, Life has been there like a couple times, but then, you know, Carrier was born. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, like, you know, we're gonna have to wait and see.
Sure.
About this one. So next we have Liiv SANDBOX. I think we only have 2 players that are announced, but we do know that some of the players have left. So we could talk about this briefly.
Yeah, I don't think we know who the 80 carry is going to be just yet, and there's not a lot of options available at the moment, so it is certainly a weird situation we're in for Liiv SANDBOX, and I have seen some of the scrims that they've been doing and who they've been playing with, and that's not announced yet, so I can't talk about it, but I think it's stand-ins at this moment in time, and I think there's a lot of tryouts going on, and first of all, let's piece it together. So we know Kroko is staying. I'm pretty sure that's announced. He hasn't been announced to leave, if I'm wrong about that. So like we assume Kroko is still there. Dove is coming in to the top side of the map. He's replacing Summit, who's gone to NA Trader. No, Summit has gone to NA, and Dove is actually role swapping to top, which I think will be good for him.
I think that's fine. I think I have some big questions about his champion pool. Like, you know, generally they're both solo lanes, but as of right now, this meta, like, there's a lot of different champions, especially because he was a big Azir enthusiast. Like, you can't play Azir in the top lane, so that's just like one of his best champions just gone out the window. So it's like,
he's not going to be playing any Victor up there, probably.
No, yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, we know he's a good player, we know he's a good solo laner, but is he a good top laner? Can he change his champion pool in time? You know, maybe he'll flourish in summer. We'll have to wait and see. I have this open. I have my phone here. Something I got on the internet, and you could tell me what...
Oh, that's right, Envy and Kale. That's right, they are announced.
They are announced.
Okay,
so
all right.
We do have Dove, Kroko, Closer, Envy, and Kale.
That's right.
It was like recent, so...
Yeah, I think it was like actually maybe even like 2 days ago or something like that. That's right.
there's so many changes happening, so it's like,
Yeah, Envy and Kale. Envy was a pretty good player for, I want to say, Gen.G's academy team. I don't remember which team he played for in Challengers, but I remember Chronicler speaking very highly of him, and I saw some of his games. He looks pretty decent. Kale, I'm not really that familiar with at all, so I can't say much. Like, I've seen some of his games, but he's a very big unknown. Liiv SANDBOX, for me, like, is a team that I fell in love with. You know, they were so romantic, as we joked
it's hard not
summer.
to fall in love with them.
And they're a team that I feel like you just want to root for. And for me, like, in the same vein that we have to put Hanwha Liiv Esports and Fredit BRION, like, I want to put, like, this team one layer above, even though it doesn't even necessarily make sense, just because I think this team has the potential to actually grow and flourish. Whereas I look at the Hanwha roster, I'm like, probably not. And the Fredit BRION one, and I'm like, I already know what the ceiling looks like. Unless you guys suddenly break through, I don't think it's going to be good. This roster has 3 proven players in Dove, Closer, and Croco, and then Kale and Envy, who are players who may flourish, but like it's too early for us to tell. But there is not really one like star player on this team outside of Croco. Closer had great moments. I mean, don't get me wrong. I was like #1 Closer fan throughout a lot of the spring season last year. But Dove is too much of a, like, Dove is equally as much of a question mark as the bot duo is. His playstyle suits a top playstyle, but it's the champion pool that you mentioned that makes me very nervous. And I gotta put this team bottom 3, I think, right now until we know more. Like, I can't really, in good conscience, say like, no, guys, like, trust me, it's gonna be okay. Even though I want to say that so badly, I can't. Yeah,
I mean, I'm kind of with you. I think I would put them slightly above bottom 3. You know, maybe like a 5 or 6 team. Again, kind of in that like cautiously optimistic zone where they're like kind of similar with KT, where you've got some familiar names. Also, more new names, I suppose, on this roster with Envy and Kale coming over. But I watched some Envy games. I thought he looked really great. I think he has a lot of potential. Kale, I think we're gonna have to wait and see. But not every roster has 5 players that are awesome, right? And Closer, I'm really happy that he's broken the chains, right? He's moved on from T1, from behind Faker rather, and now he's going to give himself a shot to kind of flourish. You know, he'll be main starter. I think, you know, I think it's fair to say that when you're on T1, there's just so much pressure because they have so many fans that are always judging you. You're not Faker. You're not as good. Now he can just be Closer. He doesn't have to be Faker sub anymore. So I'm really excited about that. And I think they have a lot of potential, but again, still questions. So cautiously optimistic for me, at least.
I'm cautiously pessimistic on this one.
That's fair. That's fair. So moving on, we do have the final 2 teams from the LCK, and they are a couple of very exciting teams, I would say. Nongshim RedForce being the first one.
I feel like this team is like filled with people whose esports dreams have died.
Like, wow. Wow, that's...
No, I know, you know what I mean? Like, all right, I'll read it out for you guys in case you guys don't know who's on this roster. It's Kana, who was, and I'll go one by one and talk about them. Kana is the top laner, who I think was one of the most heavily criticized players on T1, and by proxy, like, pretty much the entirety of the LCK. I think unjustifiably a lot of the time. And he was one of the biggest hot topic players for the offseason because Nongshim, T1, and DAMWON Kia all were like trying to hold on tightly. And Nongshim ended up getting him in the end. Controversy aside, you can read an article and form your own opinion about that. But we move on. Then you've got Dread, who was self-proclaimed ace of Afreeca, and you know, I think most people would say, I think we're kind of looking towards the top lane for that. But
I'm a huge Dread fan.
I
think that. Let me just shift over here.
He had some.
I'm a huge Dread fan. Now that we're talking about Dread,
yeah, he's getting a little excited. He's had some incredible moments. There were some obviously moments where he dropped the ball. We're not going to talk about that one game where the game was over at level 2.
Please don't.
But there was some really promising moments for him. And I think in a strong team like this, he will shine. But he's also, I feel like these are a lot of players that are either criticized or forgotten or haven't gotten the credit they deserve. Like, that's what I mean to say. Like, Dread doesn't get the credit he deserves. BDD, put him in the world song, please. The dude just nailed it when it mattered most until the very end, where then he also dropped the ball and they didn't go to the finals. But again, a player who I think is extremely underappreciated. all season long for summer, even in spring, throughout the entirety of his career. One of the best mid laners of all time. Never gets the credit he deserves. Ghost, he is a player who was one of the most heavily criticized players in the world because he didn't live up to expectations, was even temporarily benched for Showmaker, off-rolling to play bot. So the last player on the list that we're talking about is Effort. Again, a player I think we've given a lot of love and support to. I think the 4 LCK global casters have really given him a lot of praise.
Absolutely.
But I think the community and the fans haven't really appreciated him as much. And I think a lot of T1 fans have a lot of very sad and like bad memories of Effort in his brief tenure on the team because he didn't live up to Wolf and et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So I think the community doesn't give Effort the credit he deserves, and to a certain extent that's why he's kind of like on my list of these 5 players who people might not remember in 1 year. You know, like this is like, I feel like the greatest hits of players, like this is the honorable mentions team almost in a lot of ways.
I think that's a good way to put it. Everybody's had their moment to shine in their own right. And even guys like Kana, you know, even though he did get heavily criticized, there were some games where you're like, wow, this guy could be the best top laner. And I know a lot of T1 fans would say it very often, that he was the best top laner in the LCK. He's better than Khan, he's better than Keen. You know, people were saying it, right? So everybody's had their moments to shine at times. Even Ghost, where I think in 2020 especially, where DAMWON really came onto the scene, people gave him a lot of credit for being one of the best kind of like solo farmers, you know, kind of one of the more passive AD carries that can kind of get it done by himself without a support, allowing Beryl to kind of roam around and do more other supportive things to the rest of his team. So everybody's kind of had their moment to shine. And so, you know, in terms of synergy, this doesn't feel like a patchwork quilt, even though it is a lot of different players from many different teams. In this idea that you've kind of formed, Wolf, I do feel like a lot of people are going to be rooting for this lineup. Just because we're all waiting for every single one of these players to have their big moments. Not just be a great player, but to actually be like the best player or to be like the one.
Because the reason why all these players are honorable mentions and why they're like not as highly regarded as I think they should be is because they haven't had that moment consistently. They haven't like lifted the trophy, right? I mean, all these players have not taken an LCK title, right? Like, obviously Ghost has, but like, you know, the amount of flack that these players have gotten just by the virtue of their team names alone, right? Like if you're Dread and you're the best player on Afreeca, or you're Effort and you're one of the best supports in the league, but you're on Liiv SANDBOX in a hard time, like people don't raise your name up for top 5 supports when we actually do those votes at the end of the season. We do, but
but the people
the fans don't necessarily, and I think that's one of the reasons why this roster is so exciting. It's also one of 2 rosters in the LCK, along with KT Rolster, that has 5 completely new players that were not on the team before. There is like not one part of Nongshim RedForce that was on the team. That was the team that obviously came from Dynamics to RedForce last year. Not one part of it is the same, except SPS, the coach. But not one of these 5 players are the same. Same with KT Rolster. So it is weird because I feel like, I mean, it's not weird, but it feels a bit bittersweet because I think that you and I agree, and I think that Max and Chronicler also agree that Nongshim was really on the cusp of something great at the end of the year.
Yeah.
And we were like almost there. You could almost touch it. Like they almost went to Worlds, right? They were very close. They could have actually maybe if things were a little bit differently went to the finals of summer. Like they were in first place for a lot of the season. They almost won regular season.
Yeah.
And yet like because of the crazy stove league that we have going on this year, like everything is smashed, everything is broken, everything's flying around the room, and it's like, nope, it's just a completely new RedForce. We'll never know what last year's RedForce could have done with another year of experience together. And I feel a little bit sad about that. Although I do think this roster is awesome and definitely top 4, I still will wake up at night sometimes wondering, what if Rich did win an LCK title? You know?
That would have been especially great for you, Wolf. Former HOTS player was Rich. And of course, Wolf, a former HOTS caster.
That's right.
So... and he was actually the faker of the league.
He was called the faker of Heroes of the Storm. That's true.
Yeah, but Yeah, not sure what's gonna happen with that, but very excited for Nongshim. I think that everybody can get really excited for this roster and see how everything works out. I'm also kind of weirdly excited to see like how Nongshim RedForce, you know, assuming that they stay with us for 2023, like are they gonna do the same thing where they just shatter the glass of their team and they like pick out new pieces? You know, how is this kind of organization going to organize the team for the future? I'm also a little bit excited and not concerned, because I feel like they've done a good job and they've spent some money and they've obviously picked up some great players. But like, you know, what is the future of Nongshim? 4
of these players are the centerpiece of their new teams, and in a lot of ways. Peanut went to Gen.G, Gory went to FPX, Duckdom went to DAMWON Kia, and Kellen went to DAMWON Kia with him. Rich is still currently teamless, and he has been very vocal about like he felt like he was left out to dry a little bit. And Nongshim, I think. There's a lot of stuff to talk about in terms of what Nongshim did with contracts and everything. That's up to Riot to decide. But 4 of these players became extremely critical pieces for other teams, like the old 2021 roster. So even though we don't get to see this team live on the way it was, like these pieces will live on in really important places of really top teams. Yeah. Except Rich for now. We'll see what happens with him. And they'll carry that title of like, oh, we were once a Nongshim RedForce player. So excited for the future for that. And so that's Nongshim done. We do have one team left over. Actually, pretty interesting. I never realized that T1 was the last in terms of the alphabetical list. Yeah, that's kind of weird. But it kind of makes sense, you know, a team obviously with a ton of history that we do get to them at the very end. T1's roster, though, much like the organization, not really going to many places, right? A very similar team here with all players that have been with the organization from last year. So we have Zeus, or Zeus, you can call him, Owner, Faker, Gamusi, and Keria, with Asher as the sub for Keria. Yeah. Feel bad for Asher. I don't think he'll see a single game, because Keria, in my mind, is by and far the best support player. And I feel like one of the biggest things for T1 that I know you already want to talk about, Wolf, is that Polt is moving into the head coaching position. How'd you know? I mean, we're both StarCraft 2 casters. We got to talk about Polt. So Stardust, what are your overall thoughts? You can talk about the coaching. Let's talk about the coaching stuff first. So Stardust, it's a good place to start. Stardust was the head coach after Danny was fired mid-season. He's since moved to an analyst position at DAMWON Kia, but Stardust, I think, came in as kind of like there has to be a coach because that's what the rules say, and he sat there, whereas Moment was really the one who was pulling the strings, with Faker, I think, actually making a lot of the big decisions, and Polt was the general manager. I think what happens here now with Polt is the head coach, and head coach in Korea oftentimes basically means, before franchising, means I'm the guy who runs a team. In fact, sometimes the owner of a team would be listed as head coach, even though they're not actually doing any coaching at all. Yeah. In this particular case, I think Polt you will see him on stage and he will be communicating with the players, but he will be more of a father figure or figurehead coach. An advisor. Whereas Moment will still be doing strategy stuff, unless he has left the team and I've missed that announcement. I'm pretty sure he's part of the coaching staff still. Yeah, I didn't see anything about him, so I would assume he's still there. That's the assumption, right? So I think a lot of people were like, no, they got Polt. He's another StarCraft guy, and they don't know what's going on. T1 fired Danny and ran with Stardust a moment and almost won the LCK. They were very close, right? And then they almost, they could have, if they had beaten DAMWON in Game 5, maybe they would have beaten EDG and maybe they'd be the world champion. So I want to tell the T1 fans, calm down about the Polt coach. I think the Polt coaching signing, I don't think it's going to affect the roster as much as you guys think. Everything else about T1, for the most part, is, like you said, previous players, Owner, Faker, Gamusi, Keria. Asher is a new prospect that I think is a very strong player. However, so is Closer. It's Keria, so yeah, exactly. So is Closer, so, you know. I caution everyone to be skeptical of Zeus. We have seen very little gameplay from him. He's not even like Asher, where you have a lot of gameplay you can watch of him. You're just looking at solo queue stats and reading Chronicler's Twitter. I mean, that's all you're really excited about. Oh my god! He played 2 games. I feel like you just called him out there. I did. He played 2 games in LCK spring. He was back in spring. He played 2 games. Yeah. One game was such a smashing dominant win that he went 6-0 on NAR or something like that. It wasn't even about him. It was a good performance. He played well individually, but it was a stomp. And the second game, he did fine. But he is not the second coming of Faker in the top lane, as everyone says. We need more time, we need more data before we can get really excited. That being said, the prognosis from everyone who's watched scrims and what we have seen him accomplish on solo queue is good. Like, he is a player you should be excited about, but let's wait and see. 4/5 of this roster is an insanely proven team that has worked together already has pre-existing synergy. T1, you should expect to make at least one of the 2 finals this season with this roster, I would imagine. You should expect this team to go to Worlds, and we can say that right now. Like, if they don't make a finals this year and they don't go to Worlds, for example, and they bomb, like, they might be the most disappointing team of the season. Like, if they don't get top 3 in the first round robin of Spring, like, the world will be on fire. T1 fans there will be trucks outside the HQ.
Like, reminds me of another spring that we just experienced in 2021. But that actually felt like it was on fire. This time, if this one is on fire, it does feel a little bit more serious. Although, I mean, it was a pretty serious time when things were on fire in spring and in between, and with all the changes and the coaching and summer and stuff. So I have faith that they can pull through any issues. I think that T1's, in terms of their talent pool, you know, if it's not Zeus, for some reason he bombs, which I don't think is going to happen, they can probably find someone, you know, even from the challenger roster.
They'll just call Illima, they'll be like, yo, I can pay that Afreeca buyout.
Get over here, we need you right now, and then he'll come in for summer. Like, that could definitely happen. So if you're a T1 fan, you're in good hands. I think that everybody can kind of feel that. Maybe they were having some questions last year, but I think at this point, we can kind of feel it, at least based on how they have figured things out. You know, the head coaching thing with Pult there, as you mentioned, you know, Faker's still in the lineup, so he can still make all the decisions anyway. So that's probably what's going to end up happening, him and Moments making the decisions there. Guys like Owner and Gumiusi are only going to get better, I think, and they were already really good. Zeus, you know, I'm kind of on the same page. You know, we saw what happened with Bertle, right? Where we saw him for like a couple of games and everybody was like, oh my God, he's the best player ever. And then he went 0-6 and then people just didn't want to talk about him anymore.
Yeah.
Could happen with Zeus, but I like that he's the starting top laner from Spring, because as T1 has proven time and time and again, Spring is almost like a testing ground at some points. You know, you don't have to go to MSI. You don't have to be the best team in Spring. You don't have to win Spring LCK. You can still end up being maybe the best team in the world by the end of the year. So I like that he comes in, he's going to get a full split under his belt. Maybe he's going to fail a bunch of times. Maybe he will disappoint. Again, I don't personally think he will. I think he has a ton of talent and he's going to perform well right from the get-go, but I could be wrong. And that extra time will only help.
I just want to... My thing with Zeus is I just don't want anybody to be disappointed about him at all, like, no matter what. Like, keep your expectations moderate, right? Like, don't put your expectations through the roof because that's ridiculous. There's like we have literally no data to support this guy as like the second coming of Faker in the top lane. Like I said earlier, we just don't have evidence to support that yet. So like, as cool as it would be and like as awesome as it could be, and like I know a lot of T1 fans are like, we will have the perfect roster, and if he is as good as they say, this will be it. Like Kana was the problem, and he's gone now, and this is it. Like it's like you have like if there were like 5 Dragon Balls instead of however many Dragon Balls are, 7, I guess. 7. Yeah. If it was 5, they're like, we got the 5th one and we can make a wish, and like it will be 2 LCK titles for T1 and a world championship because we got all 5 Dragon Balls. I didn't have cable TV growing up. I didn't know how many Dragon Balls there were, but
I've never seen Dragon Balls either. So I just know that there's 7. There might be 9.
We are outed right now. Oh my God. But yeah, no. Final thoughts for me is like Faker has always seemed to, even since he was very young, like to have a roster of young like prodigies on his team. Mm-hmm. Like that's what seems to be like what he likes, because they do what he says, and he knows more than pretty much anybody on the planet about what to do. So
in League of Legends.
In League of Legends.
Yeah.
I wouldn't trust him to like, you know,
fix
build a building or something, or yeah, like
no,
fix my plumbing. But
it's probably a guy who knows more than him about that.
I mean,
although some Faker fans, you know, you don't know. He might say that he's the best plumber. I wouldn't know until I hire him.
But I think this is a roster that suits him, and since he's running the show, it seems to be like this is a team you should be excited for if you're a T1 fan. And yeah. I think this should be a top 3 team, if not top 2. And if anything else happens, put the trucks to the HQ, like just send them.
Yes, but again, you know, spring is spring, and we'll have to wait and see how it all shuffles together. by the end of the year. But of course, these are our expectations for spring. So guys, we have covered all of the LCK teams one by one. I hope you enjoyed our kind of analysis and our expectations for those teams. Obviously, there are a lot of teams from around the world, not just in the LCK, but of course, as LCK casters, we wanted to focus mainly on the LCK for this segment. But we are going to move over to the board and talk a little bit more about some of the other teams and our expectations for them. And we're also going to kind of rate those different teams and just against each other and see what we're most excited for. So join us in the next part.